And I hope it's been a wonderful weekend for you, or maybe a wonderful week, and especially a wonderful life. Today, we're going to continue with our current Class B study, Cosmic Trigger. I'm just going to do my sound check and then we'll proceed. Check. Test, test. Check. Okay, test, test. Cool. It's working great. So, welcome everybody. This is Jay Baldale, and I am ready, so ready, to get more into this marvelous book. Once Your Goddess. Happy Sunday. Always great to see you. And I hope you are having such a great day and weekend. All right, music check, and then pull the chat back up, and we'll get it going. All right, it's looking good. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. If you're new to this channel, I hope you enjoy some of what's going on here, and I welcome you. And if you're a repeat customer or something like that, a steady student, however you want to look at it, if you've been here before, well, as always, welcome back. It's great to have you. So we'll start out like usual. We'll go ahead and bust into the tarot and see what the tarot card for what we're going to get reading today has got to say. And just for our Sunday or whenever you might happen across this, they tend to hit when they're going to hit, and sometimes they don't, though, and that's fine too. All right, Book of Thoth. As we proceed into part one of this book, what is it you want us to know? Since these ones are actually called part one, part two, and three, I might title them a little bit different, or maybe I'll just call the video, because part one is rather long. It's not like broken up into chapters. It's a bunch of, you'll see, there's like a bunch of segments in each part. So on the like thumbnail or the caption, the title, to say part one, part one, part one, part two. I might think of a way to title it a little better than that, but I don't know, that might also be kind of funny. So maybe I'll just keep it that way. But anyway, I thank you all so much for your presence and your contributions to this channel and to the study and practice of the esoteric and occult mysteries, because it certainly does take a group, a village, a community, all of that. Everybody has their strengths and everybody has their weaknesses. And so even some of the more red flag type of people out there can certainly still have the things in which they are good with or help with. Might have a little bit of useful stuff to say here and there, that's for sure. But there is also a lot of like people who are just way more steadily on that type of time. And so we are blessed to have an abundance of teachings out there that ultimately should be helping us to sharpen that ability to discern. Okay, and speaking of which, cut the deck, and there's our tarot card today. What is it today? It's a cups. What do you guys think? Anybody else want to take a guess real quick while I finish up what I was saying, which is, yeah, just, realistically, it's about discernment. You know what I mean? And different type of rituals, as well as the different study and all that, are ultimately helping you to discern, but to kind of discern what that great Hermetic teaching, was it Hermetic? It came from the Greeks, didn't it? Know thyself. Okay, once your goddess says swords, well, on the topic of discernment, that would be rather fitting. Let's take a look. Dang, once your goddess. Woohoo! 8 swords, interference. Okay, we've got this one before. Jupiter in Gemini. Well, perhaps and then also some Mercury, because it's Hode, the 8th sphere on the tree of life. So, whether it's in that intellectual realm, that the realm that a sphere like Hode and the energies in there would be governing, or if we look at the more Jupiterian part of it, then and then also the swords of the mind. So there's kind of a double theme of the mind going on with that Hode sphere and with the element of air. But then Jupiter and kind of that mercy that Jupiter is often associated with, that giving nature, that loving nature. So perhaps you're experiencing interference in both of those aspects right now, or maybe even we as a group, because you see the 6 swords behind those 2 most prominent ones, and the top ones are all facing one way, and then the bottom ones are facing another way. And so even though things like that Trinity, that number 3 is sacred as far as creation goes, so there could be a little overlap there, but and in the way that it might be appearing in your intellectual realm as well as in your giving nature, perhaps. Maybe you're somebody who I don't know, for whatever reason right now, it may be, and shoot, it's hard to say which one might be which for you. Maybe you're feeling like a giving nature towards certain types of wisdoms, but you're kind of getting in your own way, you're interfering with yourself in doing so, giving to others or even to yourself. Maybe that way you're trying to give to yourself more learning, more teaching, but perhaps you're interfering with yourself maybe in those ways, like we've discussed a little bit, like by staying in an echo chamber, or not, by not just like perhaps digging more into things. Social media can be such a wonderful thing and also such a not so wonderful thing. And so that even though there are lots of accounts, we'll say outside of like YouTube or even the TikTok, like even stuff on Instagram or maybe even Twitter, Facebook, where you'll see these posts, these threads, these images and captions and things that are offering up these teachings. And we should be checking those things. You know what I mean? We should be seeing if what these people are saying, rather than just taking it at face value. It's definitely good to be putting these things to the test, seeing, do they cite their sources, where is this coming from, where is this teaching coming from. Interesting enough, because this card's also an 8, and I remember, like, for example, I saw a post about how there was actually, instead of the 7 hermetic principles, there was actually 8, and they hid and lied to the great they kept the 8th secret. But all of the people who are actually very studied into hermeticism say that that's just not the case. And so even though it could be it's still an interesting thought and an interesting speculation, but that doesn't mean that it's exactly the way that it's being presented isn't so much true. And so there's kind of these different ways we can be interfering with this wisdom of Hode and the abundance. So if we look at it, the abundance aspect of Jupiter too, there is definitely an abundance of teachings and information out there. But unless we're using these swords to properly discern, we might actually be using them in a way that's harmful to us. And this card too, and what was just said, and as far as this reading goes, is definitely a theme that we see in this book here. So if today's your first day tapping in, you might want to go back and get the introductions and the forewords, but also you might find it beneficial to start right here. But let's go ahead and do just that. Great to have you all. Much appreciated. Oh yeah, and that's right. So in it was in that preface because we had the forward and the intro by the two that weren't Robert Anton Wilson, but then in the prologue, yeah, where Robert Anton Wilson actually wrote that, as well as the preface, right? And in that preface where he said he would refer you back to this quote here. Yeah, that was it. Refer you back to this quote here. And there's also going to be a really cool image. So some of you might want to take a second, check it out if you can. If you're busy, come back in a quick second or whatever. But like I was saying before, there's some really cool art in this book. And that's also where this particular quote is. Oh, whoops. And so part one is titled The Sirius Connection. So Sirius, the dog star. And, I don't want to bend this book up too bad, but I might need to. So it'll cooperate with this book holder. Or I might need to use my other arm. Sometimes we got to do that move. All right, I think we got it. Okay, so here's that image. Hoo, hoo, hoo. As well as this quote, which some of you might remember because we've read this one before. It was in Liber O. In this book, it is spoken of the Sephiroth and the paths of spirits and conjurations, of gods, spheres, planes, and many other things which may or may not exist. It is immaterial whether they exist or not. By doing certain things, certain results follow. Students are most earnestly warned against attributing objective reality or philosophical validity to any of them. Aleister Crowley. Yep, so that will go a little bit with our tarot as well. That by right away deciding that you have that one answer without actually doing further digging, both into the scholarly realm as well as into your own personal realm, in the ways that if it's got something with a practical application, rather than just hearing somebody say what certain effects certain rituals or meditations will have, you should be doing those things to see if it's the same for you, if it's different for you. Maybe it's going to be, and likely it will be, a little bit of both, where there will be the similar effects, but also there will be maybe some different things as well. All right. Well, with all that being said, let's get going. The Sirius Connection. Introductory fables. Let's stretch those mental muscles a bit, fellas. From the Sufi, Mullah Nasruddin once entered a store and asked the proprietor, "Have you seen me before?" "No," was the prompt answer. "Then," cried Nasruddin, "how do you know it is me?" From the Ancient Babylonian. It was the sad time after the death of the fair young god of spring, Tammuz. The beautiful goddess Ishtar, who loved Tammuz dearly, followed him to the halls of eternity, defying the demons who guard the gates of time. But at the first gate, the guardian demon forced Ishtar to surrender her sandals, which the wise men say symbolizes giving up the will. At the second gate, Ishtar had to surrender her jeweled anklets, which the wise say means giving up ego. And at the third gate, she surrendered her robe, which is the hardest of all because it is giving up mind itself. And at the fourth gate, she surrendered her golden breast cups, which is giving up sex role. And at the fifth gate, she surrendered her necklace, which is giving up the rapture of illumination. And at the sixth gate, she surrendered her earrings, which is giving up magic. And finally, at the seventh gate, Ishtar surrendered her thousand-petaled crown, which is giving up godhood. It was only thus, naked, that Ishtar could enter eternity. Better highlight that last little bit. And so this is also the same story of the goddess Inanna. So if you look back on this channel, I've got most everything in a nice, neat little playlist, but in the live streams, I've got a few miscellaneous texts I've read that I don't have in any playlists. And so there was one I did that was titled "A Mythological Bedtime Story," and it was the story of the goddess Inanna and her descent to the underworld. So check that out if you haven't heard that one yet. And welcome in to those of you just coming in. Shy Boy says, "Are you from?" Am I from? Well, I'm from. Yeah, I'm definitely from, but I think we're all of us over here still trying to sort that one out. All right, from the Zen tradition, a monk who had meditated long in search of illumination finally received a great flash of insight. Rushing to his Roshi Zen master, the monk cried out, "I have it, I have it. That rock there is inside my head." "You must have a big head," the master replied, "to hold a rock that size." All right. And I'm not planning to go way too long today, so let me see. We might just go ahead and do this first little one here, the door to Chapel Perilous. Maybe a little more. We'll see how it flows and goes, like usual. But you can already see too if you're looking at the screen and the pages that's how. So this part one is actually rather long. It's like 100 pages or more, but it's broken up into these sections. So this one here is the door to Chapel Perilous. I was born into a working class Irish Catholic family in Brooklyn at the brutal bottom of the Great Depression. As a child, I seem to have had no odd psychic abilities, and I remember no weird experiences. The only religious event of my childhood, my first Holy Communion, was a total failure. I experienced none of the rapture and contact with God which the nuns had promised me. At 14, I became an atheist, and in college, I majored originally in electrical engineering, switching later to mathematics when I realized my basic temperament was analytical rather than practical. In my 20s, I underwent 3 forms of psychotherapy in order to clear up the remaining conflicts between my atheistic hedonism and the Catholic indoctrination of my childhood. Once at the age of 18, I had a strange experience of coming unstuck in time. Like Billy Pilgrim and Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, great book. Again, at 24, I had a kind of spontaneous satori, a sudden awakening to the immanent divinity of all things. I have regarded both of these experiences as hallucinatory and was so ashamed of them that I never discussed them with any of my 3 psychotherapists. Some of you might have experienced something a little similar. Then, in 1962, at the age of 30, I began to experiment with mind altering drugs. This area is only a little less controversial than nuclear power plants, to put it mildly, but let us remember that there are 3 schools of scientific thought about those chemicals. One, some regard these potions as psychotomimetic, that is, the altered consciousness they produce is considered an imitation mime of psychosis. 2, some regard them as hallucinogens, that is, the new mental state created by ingestion is considered a hallucinatory experience, but not quite a psychosis. 3, some regard them as psychedelics, a word coined by Humphrey Osmond, MD, or as metaprogramming substances, coined by John Lilly, MD. That is, the new state is considered one in which we can recognize or re-imprint our nervous system for higher functioning. Science will eventually determine which interpretation is most correct through future research. This decision will unfortunately not be reached by any amount of verbal debate or throwing the dissenters into jails, no matter how loud the denunciations or how many heretics are imprisoned. This is very inconvenient for the government, which always wants to settle every issue by outlawing disagreement, but that is not how science works. Hmm. I, I originally got interested in mind altering drugs due to an article in the most conservative magazine in the USA, the National Review, edited by Roman Catholic millionaire William Buckley Jr. Later, of course, Buckley and his magazine would attack drug experiments with neo inquisitorial fury. But back in innocent 60 or 61, they naively printed an article by conservative historian Russell Kirk reviewing Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, in which Huxley recounted how he had transcended time and space and experienced heaven. Huxley did it under the influence of mescaline, a drug derived from the sacred cactus peyote used in American Indian rituals. Russell Kirk thought this was good scientific evidence to support religiosity in general against the liberal humanists, whom he regards as the prime villains in history. Kirk said, among other things, that the only that only the most dogmatic, old-fangled materialist would reject Huxley's report a priori without duplicating the experiment. Being a dogmatic, old-fangled materialist at the time, I resented this and argued about it a lot inside my head over a period of months. It seemed that, as a materialist, I had to accept one aspect of Huxley's book that Kirk had not noted: the strong implication that consciousness is chemical in nature and changes as its chemistry changes. That was provocative. The materialist had his first drug trip on October 28, 1962, in an old slave cabin in the woods outside Yellow Springs, Ohio. And the materialist, so there's another one of his little epithets he gives himself. With my wife Arlen and our four small children, I had rented the cabin from Antioch College for $30 per month and had an acre of cleared land to grow food on, 30 acres of woods to seek mystery. Farming was only partly supporting us. I was working as assistant sales manager for a microscopic business, the Antioch Bookplate Company in Yellow Springs. But we had found, we thought, a way to escape the regimented urban hive without starving to death. Before eating the first peyote button, the materialist asked his supplier, a black jazz musician, "Is this stuff dangerous at all?" "The fuck," he said. "The Indians been eating it every full moon for thousands of years." "Oh, yeah, that's right," the materialist said, remembering also Huxley's glowing description of his first trip. I quickly ate 7 buttons and for the next 12 hours whirled through an unrehearsed and incoherent tour of the vestibule of Chapel Perilous, a most educational and transcendental experience. A few years later, it would have been different, of course. The materialist would have said, "But the newspapers claim that people sometimes go crazy on this stuff and flip out for months." And the supplier would have said, "The newspapers also say our troops are in Vietnam to help the Vietnamese. Man, don't believe any of the crap they say." Oh, not the they. And, being of a curious and experimental nature, I would have gone ahead anyway, but with a lot of doubt, and that could easily have turned into anxiety or outright panic. We later saw exactly that happen to others after the press really got into gear on this story and built up the hysteria to fever pitch. As it was, the materialist simply suffered the usual delusion of the first trip. He thought he was reborn. After all, back then, he had Russell Kirk in the National Review, the certified sages of sanctified conservatism, on his side. When, in the following weeks, it became sadly obvious that I was not entirely reborn and that many neurotic, depressive, and egotistic programs still remained in my central computer, I was somewhat disillusioned. But the trip had been so interesting and ecstatic, like the Lady of Spain in the poem, I tried again and again and again and again and again. By mid 1963, I had logged 40 trips to inner space, and it was obvious that peyote was indeed a magical chemical, as the Indians claim, but that one had to be a shaman to know how to use it profitably. We don't propose to enthuse about those 40 peyote voyages in Technicolor prose. There was more than enough of that kind of writing in the 1960s. In Dr. Timothy Leary's terminology, each trip involved a transmutation of consciousness from the symbolic and linear terrestrial circuits of the nervous system to the somatic genetic future circuits. Dr. Leary's circuit theories are explained in Part 2, Models and Metaphors. The materialist learned to experience rapture and bliss, to transcend time. In each trip, the body was resurrected. Osiris rose from his tomb. I was godly and eternal for a while. Each time, the yo yo effect, as Dr. Richard Alpert calls it, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Richard Alpert is Ram Dass. The yo yo effect occurred within a day or so. I came down again. The next trip brought me back up, of course, but then once more I came down again. Up and down, up and down. The yo yo effect. It was alternately inspiring and exasperating. But a change in my mind, my neurological functioning, Dr. Leary would say, was slowly and subtly beginning to happen. The materialist frequently had the hallucination of telepathic communication with plants, both when flying on the wings of peyote and when he was straight. Hallucination was the judgment of his engineering trained rational mind. It seemed real as all get out each time it happened. But the materialist knew too much to take it seriously, and he continued to know too much until later in the 60s when Cleve Baxter's research with polygraphs produced some hard evidence that human plant telepathy may be occurring all the time, usually outside the conscious attention of the human participant. Several times the materialist contacted an energy or an intelligence that seemed to deserve the description superhuman. It was obvious to me that I could easily, with a less skeptical cast of mind, describe these trans-time dialogues as meetings with actual gods or angels. Quanah Parker, the great Cheyenne war chief, who was converted to pacifism by a peyote trip and later founded the Native American church, used to say, the white man goes into his church and talks to Jesus. The Indian goes into his teepee, takes peyote, and talks with Jesus. I regarded the entities contacted as X, contacted as X's, unknowns. Capital X, he has it as. Contacted as X's unknowns and tried in each experiment and in reflections between experiments to find a psychological, neurological, or even parapsychological explanation. The strangest entity I contact in those 20 odd months of psychedelic explorations appeared one day after the end of a peyote trip, when I was weeding in the garden and a movement in the adjoining cornfield caught my eye. I looked over that way and saw a man with warty green skin and pointy ears dancing. The skeptic watched for nearly a minute, entranced, and then green skin faded away, just a hallucination. But I could not forget him. Unlike the rapid metaprogramming during a peyote trip, in which you are never sure what is real and what is just the metaprogrammer playing games, this experience had all the qualities of waking reality and differed only in intensity. The entity in the cornfield had been more beautiful, more charismatic, more divine than anything I could consciously imagine when using my literary talents to try to portray a deity. As the mystics of all traditions say so aggravatingly, those who have seen know. Well, I had seen, but I didn't know. I was more annoyed than enlightened. But that was not to be my last encounter with that particular critter. 5 years later, in 1968, the skeptic read Carlos Castaneda's The Teachings of Don Juan, dealing with traditional Mexican shamanism and its use of the sacred cactus. Castaneda, an anthropologist, saw the same green man several times, and Don Juan Matus, the shaman, said his name was Mescalito. He was the spirit of the peyote plant, but the materialist had seen him before he ever read a description of him. That was most perplexing to the materialist. A fairly plausible explanation is that Mescalito is an archetype of the collective unconscious in the Jungian sense. He has been reported by many others besides Castaneda and me. And he always has the same green, warty skin and is often dancing. However, might we dare to consider that Mescalito may be just what the shamans who know him best always say he is, one of the spirits of the vegetation? Too silly an idea for sophisticates like ourselves. Paracelsus, the founder of modern medicine, believed in such spirits and claimed frequent commerce with them. So did the German poet Goethe, and the pioneer of organic agriculture, Rudolf Steiner. And the ideas of Goethe and Steiner, once rejected as too mystical, are currently being seriously reconsidered by many ecologists. Or consider Gustav Fechner, the creator of scientific psychology and psychological measurement. Fechner lost his sight and then regained it, after which he asserted that with his new vision he saw many things normal people do not see, including auras around humans and other living creatures and vegetation spirits just like Mescalito. George Washington Carver also claimed a link with spirits in the vegetation, and so did the great Luther Burbank. Thomas Edison became so convinced of their literal existence that he spent many years trying to develop a photographic process that would render them visible. Marcel Vogel, whose corporation, Vogel Luminescence, has developed the red color used in fluorescent crayons and the psychedelic colors popular in 1960s poster art, has been studying plant consciousness and vegetative telepathy for 10 years now. In one experiment, Vogel and a group of psychologists tried concentrating on sexual imagery while a plant was wired up with a polygraph to reveal its electrochemical, emotional responses to their thoughts. The plant responded with the polygraph pattern typical of excitement. Vogel speculates that talking of sex could stir up in the atmosphere some sort of sexual energy, such as the orgone claimed by Dr. Wilhelm Reich. If this is true, the ancient fertility rites in which humans had sexual intercourse in freshly seeded fields might indeed have stimulated the fertility of crops. And the shamans are not as naive as we like to think. Mescalito could be both an archetype of Jung's collective unconscious and an anthropomorphized human translation of a persistent signal sent by the molecular intelligence of the vegetative world. Naturally, the ability to decode such orgonomic or neuroelectric signals would be eagerly sought by all shamans in societies dependent on agriculture. In other words, according to this model, mescalito is a genetic signal in our collective unconscious, but activated only when certain molecular transmissions from the plant world are received. This shamanic kind of selective attention or special perception has been duplicated in the modern world by Dr. Vogel, who has given many demonstrations before audiences in which he accurately reads vegetative signals from plants. It is no more spooky than the selective yogic trance of the average city dweller, which allows him to walk in mindless indifference through incredible noise, filth, pandemonium, misery, neurosis, violence, psychosis, grape, burglary, injustice, and exploitation, screening it all out and concentrating only on robot repetition of his assigned role in the hive economy. One can train oneself to receive or ignore a far wider variety of signals than the neurologically untrained realize. A third model would be that Mescalito and all his kith and kin, the fairies and little people, etc., are all extraterrestrials who have been experimenting upon us for millennia. This does not necessarily mean that they come here in spaceships. Consider the following speculations. Number one, Clarke's Law by science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Imagine a technology 100 years beyond ours, 1,000 years beyond ours, 1,000,000 years beyond ours. And then remember that many stars might have which might have planets and civilizations are literally billions of years older than our sun. There might be races in this galaxy advanced as much as 10 billion years beyond our technology. An old Arizona joke asks, how many Apaches are hiding in this room? The answer is, as many as want to. Advanced communication technologies would be far more subtle than the stalking techniques of the Apaches. If Clarke is right, even on a materialistic level, the only answer to how many advanced civilizations are monitoring the events in this room must be as many as want to. Number two, Wilson Corollary to Clarke's Law by Robert Anton Wilson. Any scientifically advanced parapsychology is even more indistinguishable from magic. Consider the slow advance of parapsychology. Despite Despite entrenched opposition during the past 70 years, project it forward another 100 years, 1,000, a million, and imagine races in this galaxy 10 billion years ahead of us in this area. Extraterrestrials with advanced psionic knowledge may have been experimenting on us and or aiding our evolution and or playing ontology games with us for millions of years, projecting any form they devise from Mescalito to the Lord God Jehovah, without ever leaving their home planets. If a salesman in West Virginia and a college student in Washington, D.C. can both share the same hallucination of faster than light UFO abduction to a planet called Lanalis, where everybody goes naked, then maybe there is one interstellar broadcaster of such educational dramas. Maybe. And let me see how long this next one is. Yeah, let's do just a little bit more today. We'll do this next one too, another 2 pages or so. Okay, so did a leprechaun leave the Simonton pancakes? A greenish skinned, pointy eared man, the greenish skinned, pointy eared man I saw in 1963, has appeared in the folklore of many cultures who do not even use peyote. He has been seen most frequently in recent years as a humanoid extraterrestrial in various flying saucer reports by alleged contactees. And in the late 1960s, he began to appear regularly on TV, known as Mr. Spock on the Star Trek show, and has remained on the tube ever since, despite frequent network attempts to cancel the show and get rid of him. The fans always insist on bringing him back, and now in 1977, as I write, Mr. Spock is scheduled to appear either in the first Star Trek movie or a revival of the series on TV. He is an image, or as Jung would say, an archetype that cannot be erased from the human mind. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with how Mr. Spock looks, oh, good, he's going to show a picture. I was going to say he looks a lot similar to not only this description of Mescalito, but also to what the way elves are commonly depicted, or even fairies. I guess it depends on who's drawing them, or maybe generating them with computer imagery. Okay. Mescalito takes many forms in many myth systems. Here he is as Peter Pan in a commercial advertisement, as sketched from descriptions by American Indian shamans, and as Mr. Spock on Star Trek. He is one of the most widely reported denizens of Chapel Perilous and is known in dozens of shamanic traditions. So there's those drawings right there if you're not looking, with Peter Pan on the left, the Mescalito, typical Mescalito in the middle, and then Mr. Spock on the right with those pointy ears. Okay. By coincidence, in his guise as Spock, this pointy eared godling has given us a slogan that has become widely used in correspondence among immortalist scientists dedicated to the search for longevity and eventual physical immortality. The slogan is, of course, live long and prosper. We have seen that slogan on letters from the Cryonics Society of Michigan, the Bay Area Cryonics Society, the Prometheus Society, and other immortalist groups. This coincidence will appear possibly to be more than a coincidence when we have examined further data. The Irish form of Mescalito is the leprechaun, noted for playfulness, trickery, and oddly for leaving behind gifts in the form of food, just as the alleged UFO knot left Joe Simonton a gift of pancakes. It needs to be emphasized that whether we are talking of an experience involving Mescalito or one involving a kitchen chair, all of our perceptions have gone through myriads of neural processes in the brain before they appear to our consciousness. At the point of conscious recognition, the identified image is organized into a three-dimensional hologram which we project outside ourselves and call reality. We are much too modest about our own creativity if we take any of these projections literally. We see the sun going down at twilight, but science assures us that nothing of the sort is happening. Instead, the earth is turning. We perceive an orange as really orange, whereas it is actually blue, the orange light being the light bouncing off the real fruit. And everywhere we look, we imagine solid objects, but science finds only a web of dancing energy. The great and venerable Sufi sage Mullah Nasruddin once raced through Baghdad on his donkey, galloping as fast as the poor beast could travel. Everybody got excited, and people rushed into the streets to find out why the philosopher was in such a great hurry. "What are you looking for, Mullah?" Somebody shouted. "I'm looking for my donkey," Nasruddin answered. Like most Sufi jokes, this seems calculated only to annoy us, like a Marx Brothers routine that doesn't quite succeed in being funny. Actually, Nasruddin was much given, perhaps overmuch, to acting out his parables, and he was merely dramatizing the most common error of seekers after the cosmic secret. We look for the secret, the philosopher's stone, the elixir of the wise, supreme enlightenment, God, or whatever the final answer might be, in all directions, north, east, south, and west, and all the time it is carrying us about. Shoot, missed highlighting that one on the first go. It is the human nervous system, the marvelous instrument through which we create order out of chaos, science out of ignorance, meaning out of mystery, mescalito or a chair out of whirling energy. Whirling energy. Kind of like the first Sephirah on the Tree of Life. Kether. The Kabbalistic Tree of Life, that is. Dogen Zenji, an 18th century Zen master, used to ask trainees, "Who is the master who makes the grass green?" Again, the answer is as close as our visual cortex. Psychologists have performed thousands of experiments revealing the presence of the master who makes the grass green, which Dr. John Lilly calls the metaprogrammer in the nervous system. Two actors rush into a Psychology 101 class, and one makes a stabbing motion at the other, who falls. Almost all the students see a knife in the stabber's hand. Later, it turns out the actual implement was a banana. Apparently, the stabbing motion itself creates the knife. The nervous system knows that nobody stabs anybody with a banana, just as it still knows, despite 300 years of science, that the sun goes down in the evening. Or a picture is flashed on a screen, or that the earth isn't flat, but hey. Or a picture is flashed on a screen for 1 second. It shows a white man struggling with a black man, and the white man is wielding a razor. Again, the nervous system knows what it is programmed to see. The majority of students, even those who will swear until blue in the face that they are not racist, will see the razor in the black man's hand, our national stereotype. And we still see the orange as orange, even though we know it isn't. And then here's another image. He's got an optical illusion here. So when you first take a look at this, what is it you see first? If you've never done optical illusions before, but I'm sure everybody's encountered them at least a little bit. You can see this image above at least two ways. Our inability to see the world more than one way normally is due to cultural conditioning, according to modern behavioral scientists, or to the fact that we are all asleep, according to the mystics. Of course, we all realize that other people are frequently inclined to what Freud called projection, seeing what they expect to see, that our own experience of reality might be equally self created, that, as Nietzsche said, we are all greater artists than we realize, is hard to believe, and even harder to remember moment by moment, even after we have had enough experience to believe it. Learning to remember the invisible donkey who carries us about, the self programmer, is the first step in awakening from conditioned mechanical consciousness to true objective consciousness. Whether or not there are fairies, elves, and extraterrestrials hiding behind every bush, awakening reveals that the universe is full of invisible intelligence. It is very hard for us to learn to contact that intelligence without clothing it in projected humanoid forms. And I think we've talked a little bit about that too. And I need to highlight a little more. Or even that part in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna reveals his universal form and Arjuna says, I liked you better in the human form. Go back to that. So same with any of the, like Jehovah, he already brought up in this book. Um, Whatever type of spirits you might work with. Like even in the lesser key, right, where a lot of them will appear a certain type of way, some of them more unsettling than others, but a lot of times in some type of animalistic form, or maybe a little more abstract symbolic type of form, but at the command of the exorcist he putteth on the shape of a human. Okay. In the early stages of work on consciousness, the master who makes the grass green, the metaprogrammer, insists on converting everything into humanoid gestalts. That's because at that level, it is still a human chauvinist. All right. You know what? I'm going to do this one more because it's a pretty short, and also allegedly YouTube pays a little more attention to what you're talking about in the beginning of the streams than when you're this far in. And so we might not want to start this next one on the next class B. And this is why. This next section, the Kennedy assassination and the net. While I was conducting peyote research in Yellow Springs, Ohio, weirder business was afoot in New Orleans, Louisiana. Two young men who had served in the Marines together were coincidentally living in the quarter, a few blocks apart, without meeting again. The more famous of the two was named Lee Harvey Oswald, and during the summer of 1963, while I was having my first encounters with leprechauns, Mr. Oswald ordered a Carcano rifle through the mail. What Oswald did with that rifle is still a matter of much controversy and endless conspiracy mongering. The other young man was named Kerry Thornley and was in the process of creating a new religion called Discordianism, which later became a central theme in the novels and plays collectively called Illuminatus. How all that happened is the oddest part of our whole narrative. And Proteus, Sierra Vions, happy Sunday, happy weekend, and it's always great to see you. He says, secret late stream teachings. Oh, yeah. The secret late stream teachings indeed. Later that fall, Oswald's wife separated from him and went to live with Mrs. Ruth Payne in Fort Worth. Mrs. Payne was the sister of my family doctor. When this connection came to light after the enigmatic events in the Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, the materialist regarded it as an amusing coincidence. I hadn't gotten heavily enough into Jung yet to call it synchronicity. As for Kerry Thornley, I didn't meet him until 1967, whereupon I embraced Thornley's religion of Discordianism and also became a close friend. And then some conspiracy buffs announced that Thornley was part of the Kennedy assassination team, that he was, in fact, the second Oswald. A second Oswald theory was suggested by Professor Popkin in the book called The Second Oswald. But we'll come to that later. It was also in 1963 that Alan Watts, Zen philosopher clown, that's funny. I don't think he means it in the diss way. I think he means it in the way that Alan Watts had a good sense of humor, came through southern Ohio to visit his sister in Dayton and visited our farm. Jano, Mrs. Watts, was with him, and it was probably at that time that she first used her term, the net, in my hearing. The net, according to Jano, is a web of coincidence or synchronicity which connects everything in the universe with everything else in the universe. Kind of like Indra's net. For instance, I originally introduced Alan Watts to Jano around 1960. Their relationship became his last, longest, and happiest marriage, and Alan's middle name was Wilson, which you may have noticed is my last name. Many other scientists have agreed with Carl Jung's opinion that the number of startling coincidences in the net increases sharply around anybody who becomes involved in depth psychology or in any investigation that extends the perimeter of consciousness. Arthur Kessler has written about this at length in both The Roots of Coincidence and The Challenge of Chance. Dr. John Lilly has whimsically suggested that consciousness research activates the agents of cosmic coincidence control center. Let us hope he is joking. In New Orleans, Oswald and Thornley went about their different lives, and in Ohio, the narrator went about his. And the net was gradually drawing us all into what, in Illuminatus, we have called Operation Mindfuck. When John Fitzgerald Kennedy was blown apart by Oswald and or persons unknown, something died in the American psyche. As Jules Pfeiffer, among others, has noticed, Kennedy was not a universally beloved president, of course. Nobody has ever been, not even Washington. But he was young or youngish, handsome, cultured, brave. Everybody knows the PT 109 story, and viral. There was a commotion of primitive terrors loosed upon the national psyche by the deadly Plaza bullets. Camelot died. The divine king had been sacrificed. We were caught suddenly in the midst of a Fraser Freud reenactment of archetypal anthropological ritual. The national psyche veered dizzily toward Chapel Perilous. The first conspiracy surfaced, if memory is accurate, in the National Guardian, a left wing newspaper, only weeks after the assassination. The skeptic read it with interest, and it did not convince me. When the Warren Report came out finally, the skeptic also studied that with some care. It also did not convince me. In fact, I was often amazed that so many people did have so many strong opinions on the subject. I began to understand why the Sufis are always attacking opinions. Everybody nowadays thinks that they must have an opinion on everything, whether they know anything about it or not. Unfortunately, few people know the difference between an opinion and a proof. Worse yet, most have no knowledge at all about the difference in degree between a merely legal proof, a logical or verbal proof, a proof in the soft sciences like psychology, and a proof in the hard physical mathematical sciences. They are full of opinions, but they have little ability to distinguish the relative degree of proof upholding all these various opinions. We say seeing is believing, but actually, as Sanatayana pointed out, we are all much better at believing than at seeing. In fact, we are seeing what we believe nearly all the time and only occasionally seeing what we can't believe. All right. Well, that was a pretty good start into part one. When we resume this class, okay, yeah, because this next one's quite long. Cool. He's going to tell us about a visit to Millbrook. He's going to tell us about the Queen of Space and just a lot of fun things in this book. This book is quite a fun adventure into Chapel Perilous, as he himself puts it. So, I sure hope it's as much of a treat for all of you as it is for me. And if not, well, that's why we like to keep two classes going, because hopefully at least one of them is very synchronistic for what you may have going on in your journey on this beautiful blue ball floating through space. Blue and green, mostly blue. All right, everybody. Well, good to see you guys. Proteus, always great to see you. One True Goddess, always great to see you. And Shy Boy, welcome in. And for the rest of you, tomorrow we'll be back to Transcendental Magic. We got some witchcraft to talk about this week. We've got some, I believe, some astrology to come up, as well as, oh, what was the other one? Oh, yeah, charms and filters. So that ought to be fun. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys there, whether it's live or on the replay. Much love, many blessings. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday or whatever time and space you happen across this. This has been Jay Baldell, and this has been Robert Anton Wilson's Cosmic Trigger, the final secret of the Illuminati. Bye-bye.